Frontier Fantasy Series, The Tales of Alvin Maker, poetry and mini plays and scripts. He's also won the John W. Campbell Award, the Nebula twice, the Hugo 4 times, and the 2008 Margaret A. Edwards Award for Young Adult Literature. He received the L. Ron Hubbard Lifetime Achievement Award for outstanding contributions to the arts in 2014. And those who were there this year at the Rise to Future workshop and at the awards event were able to say hello to him, meet him in person. He was here in Los Angeles, which is a real treat for everybody. He's been a judge of the Rise to Future contest since 1994, having earlier served as a guest instructor through writers' workshops, both at Sag Harbor, Long Island, and at Pepperdine University. So with that, I want to, again, remind you to keep your mics off, and we're going to start now with questions. And first one here, we've got Kenton Erb. I've been working on a middle grade book for more than 3 years, writing most days with about 170,000 words, which is mostly me or college brain, trying to work out direction and details. I'm stuck at chapter 5, though. I've written other scenes. Do I abandon the story and move on?
Well, you have 170,000 words. Surely not all of that is in line with the story in 5 chapters, since that's actually longer than the quite long novel I'm getting near the end of right now. I'm at 150,000 words, and I'm almost done. So I'm assuming that the 175,000 words are attempt after attempt to get things right, setting some aside, redoing, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, you are fiddling with this story. You have gone a long way into it, but you're talking about writing YA. So your target length is between 40 and 70,000 words. So you've already proven that you can write more than that. But what you haven't done is found your story. You may have ideas that you believe will become the story, but when you find the story, it means that you know who is going to prevail in a dilemma that will be important to the reader as well as to the character. And you begin that story at the point where the character who will have the biggest role in resolving the dilemma gets involved with the dilemma. And so once you have begun with that character and given us the dilemma, that's all in chapter 1, then you simply proceed, I say simply, that's a joke, you proceed to tell us what happens and why until we get to that promised ending where the dilemma gets resolved. And if you find that it takes you more than 100,000 words to get there, you're probably not writing a YA novel. If it has Harry Potter in it, then it'll still be children's literature, because they created the children's literature category in the New York Times bestseller list in order to get Harry Potter off the main bestseller list, so that poor, sad, mistreated literary writers could go ahead and have their place on the New York Times bestseller list without that dang Harry Potter getting in the way. But we understand that Harry Potter was still the best things being published the entire time that it was on the lists. So when you talk about where you are in it and all the work you've been doing, you have been working. Should you go ahead and move to something else? I don't know. If the stuff I talked about, the dilemma, the character that's going to resolve it, and so on, if that feels right, that you got that, you're doing that, good. If that sounded like an alien communication and has nothing to do with what you're doing, then perhaps you need to move away from this for a little while until you can come back and find the story, the structure of the story. Now, structure does not have anything to do with the 3-act structure they teach you about in fake film writing classes. It has nothing to do with any structures they taught you in literature classes, because they have no idea. It has to do with simply this: you promise the story you're going to deliver, and then you deliver it. That's as great a structure as you will ever need, because the odd thing is the number of writers who begin at a cool place looking for a hook to interest the reader, so they don't begin with the story they plan to deliver. They begin with the story they think is coolest for an opening, and then they switch. And so when you get to the end, the reader is sitting there going, but what about the thing that he thought the story was going to be about? Because that's where you started. That's what you promised. And so the idea is, don't promise something you're not going to deliver. Your opening needs to promise what you'll deliver. Now, when you talk about a YA novel, it doesn't tell me anything about genre, because that can be anything from somebody having in high school with a friend who's dying of some obscure illness, to military, to all kinds of things. And obviously, since you are still muted, you're not going to fill me in on more. But since you know the actual genre, YA is an age group, and it is treated like a genre in our industry. But there's so many different kinds of YA novels that in order to be any more helpful than what I just was, I would have to know more about it. Now, has that been at all helpful? You can't nod. I can't see you. So the only person I'm concentrating on right now is Neil Young, because I was so thrilled that he showed up. Doesn't look like the pictures on the albums, but nevertheless, he's doing his best. Now, who was it? Was this Kenton Erb?
Yes.
Okay, so I am seeing you nodding. You have a better beard than mine. I resent that. And I hope that something I said has helped and made sense. If not, go ahead and follow up with another question later. I'm ready for the next question, John.
Okay, good. Now, this is from Peter Armstrong from Pennsylvania. Should I use standard or metric in my futuristic sci-fi novel? On the one hand, it's likely that metric becomes a standard in the future, so it lends realism to use metric. On the other hand, my American readers may not know metric and are accustomed to standard, and I don't want to confuse them. On the third hand, so we're talking, this is alien
So now
sci-fi.
I'm confused, yeah.
On the third hand, because this is sci-fi after all, okay, good. 95% of the planet uses metric, so my international readers may not know standard. Believe it or not, this simple question has plagued me from the first page in my book. Help.
Oh, so let's unplague you right now. Metric. If you're writing in the future, metric. Even America will eventually grow up and learn metric. Almost every American knows that a meter is more or less a yard plus a little bit. And so, if you say it's 100 meters, we know that it's a little longer than a football field. Well, actually, kind of a lot longer by the time you get up to 100. There are other things, centimeters we know are ridiculously small, more than 2 of them to an inch. I fiddled with that when I was starting out, and I really at that time had no idea what anything was. We know a kilometer is way less than a mile, so that 100 kilometers an hour is 60 miles an hour. There are conversions going on in our heads. The hard one is Celsius versus Fahrenheit. That is a killer, because the numbers work out all wrong unless it happens that all of your novels take place at minus 40 degrees. And so I would urge you to not only use metric, at the risk of confusing American readers who are already confused, so you're not really doing any harm. Go ahead and write for the world and let Americans catch up with the world.
Good answer. Thank you. This is from Darren Lipman. Question: when judging Wolf's stories, what's the biggest area in need of improvement you've noticed?
When judging
Rise of Future Stories submissions, what's the biggest area?
You got to understand, I'm one of the finals judges, which means I see the quarterly winners only. So all I see are excellent stories, and I and the other judges choose among excellent stories to choose the excellentest of them. And I think that should be a word. It is now. And so I can't tell you anything about where people are having problems. I know from my writing students the kinds of problems that I have seen over the years. And I have to say that after many classes of varying qualities, the problems are all the same. Nobody comes up with new problems. There are mistakes like believing things your creative writing professor taught you so that you're writing in present tense, worse yet, first person present tense, so that it's as if you had a notebook with you wherever you go writing this novel. Horrible, horrible choice. First person is a bad choice. Present tense is a ridiculous choice. And I'm not going to give that sermon again. I've given it 9 times already. And if you guys have access to those, you know. But trust me, all serious commercial writers know that English hates present tense as badly as French hates past tense. And the only reason we do present tense is because the French do present tense. And they do that because they hate their preterite, and present tense works better for them. Ours doesn't. And well, I'm going to give a little bit of this because we don't use our present tense. We use it occasionally in usages like saying we don't use our present tense. That's present tense because I'm saying that in general, over time, we do not use present tense. But in specific, hi, this is Bob. What are you doing right now? Well, I'm walking through the aisles of Lucky Supermarket, wishing that they had better quality food. What tense was that? That was present progressive. That is our real present tense. And man, if you start writing a novel in which every verb ends with ing, the reader will hate you and throw the book against the wall within 3 or 4 pages. It's just a vile thing to do to them because that is our present. But our past tense we use all the time. You see it when you're telling an anecdote. Yeah, I'm walking through Lucky's. I'm hoping to find some beef that looks edible. That quest is not working. And so and somebody says, what do you mean? Lucky's has pretty good meat. And you go, no, none of it was good. It looked like it all had been gray and spray painted red. Now, what did I do? As soon as I was challenged, I switched to past tense. Because past tense is how we tell the truth in English. Right? We tell jokes in present. Guy, a priest, a rabbi, and an alien go walk into a bar, etc. That's present tense because it's a joke. And you don't even need to know more. If I've got a priest, a rabbi, and an alien, write your own punchline. But the moment I'm trying to tell you the truth, I will have moved to the past tense. Now, of course, you use all the tenses all the time as they're appropriate in your narrative. But your general fallback position is past tense. There it is, sermon given. That's the main thing that people do wrong. Another thing that they do wrong is trying to conceal the story idea to make it the reveal at the end. No. If you have a good story idea, begin by telling us the story idea. Begin with it. Then you're free to develop and tell a story. I once, in a graduate writing class that I made the mistake of taking, read a short 3-page story, 3 pages, in which it was never clear really what was happening. And the reason why was, at the end, we got the reveal that the viewpoint character was blind. How do you not tell us at the beginning? The writer had to spend all of her effort trying to conceal the fact that the character was blind without contradicting her blindness. So no visual descriptive terms at all, and yet not telling us the key information that it's a little difficult to get around if somebody moves a piece of your furniture. I made that suggestion that perhaps she should just tell us that she's blind from page 1. And everybody in the class looked horrified because the way that they thought about stories, they thought that meant they wouldn't even have a story, that the suspense was all about figuring out what was going on. If that's what your suspense is from, stop, write something else, because we need to know what's going on step by step all the way through. If we don't know what's going on, why are we trusting you to deliver a story? If you were riding in a car with somebody who said, "Oh, isn't this a freeway?" You would feel like you wanted to get out of that car because he didn't have any idea where he was. And if you make the reader feel like you don't know where you are or you're not telling us where we are, then they're going to give up on you, and correctly so, because you are not doing your job. Your job is to tell us what happened and why as simply and clearly as possible. And if you're doing that, we'll forgive all kinds of other stuff. You can make other mistakes. It's fine. Not fine. Obviously, don't make those mistakes either, but they're not going to be killer mistakes the way they are if you choose the wrong viewpoint, the wrong tense, or you are not letting us in on what's happening. Clarity. So we need to do three things in every story. We need to believe in it, which means that if something is really unbelievable, you prepare for it or you defend it. Not by saying, this is really believable because no footnotes. What's his name? Anyway, there was a writer who used to put footnotes in his fiction. And I got to tell you, that's distracting. Reminds you there's an author, and it reminds you that you're reading fiction because footnotes don't belong in fiction. But Jack Vance? Anyway, the thing that you need to be concentrating on is letting us know what's happening as the viewpoint character experiences it. So if, like Frodo, you begin Lord of the Rings not having the faintest idea where Bilbo's ring originated, then when Gandalf tells Frodo where it originated, we get to find out at the same time. And so we are moving along with the character as the character discovers things. That's what viewpoint is for. And so if you choose the right viewpoint character, not somebody who already knows everything, how will that person guide us to anything? He has nothing to discover. Gandalf would have been a hideous point of view character in Lord of the Rings. He knew far too much at the beginning. And so what would we do? Have a long expository discourse by him, 7 chapters of Gandalf telling us what he knows? That would have been awful. But that is, by the way, how Ben-Hur begins. Best-selling novel of the second half of the 19th century, absolutely a stunner, and beloved, stage production after stage production. Have you ever opened it and read? Anybody here, raise your hand if you have. I'm seeing no hands because, one, Montgomery Kelly and Kenton Erb. Okay, and you guys both look like you have maybe even more white hair than I do. And so, well, more hair, you definitely both have more hair than I do. But you're old enough that you might have actually tried it. But how does it begin? It begins with 3 people essentially supposedly representing Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. The author had no idea about Islam or Judaism, period. He was so ignorant that it was humiliating for those of us who know a little bit about those religions. But they were having a discussion that goes on. Basically, if you impregnate somebody at the beginning, the baby will be walking by the time you're done reading that portion. It's just some of the worst writing till Ayn Rand did the chapter, This is John Galt Speaking, in Atlas Shrugged. She was able to top it for sheer density and stupidity. But you have to, skim over all of that. Just skip it. Nothing in it matters at all for the remainder of the novel. You just go until you read a chapter beginning that starts with the name Judah Ben-Hur. Then you're in the novel Ben-Hur. Now, you don't want to do some crap like that. You don't want to do some long prologue that they have to suffer through because they're not going to do it. We're not patient like 19th century readers were. I think they all skipped it too. But we require that you get into the story as quickly as possible so that everything we read actually counts. It's actually part of what we came to this book to receive.
Good. And just to further on that point, I've got 2 podcast interviews, one with Carrie English and one with Jody Lynn Nye, the coordinating judge. Carrie's the first reader. They also talk about what they're looking for and common problems that they get that disqualify readers at the get go. So there, that's enough of that. So next one we now here's with Marcelo Baghetti from, I think he's from Provo. Question: I read your book Wakers and I loved it. When our story has teenagers as protagonists, as in Wakers, what should be our concern, our top concern in developing them?
They're people. Oddly enough, a thing that I remember about my own teens is that I was a person and I thought I was a real person. I didn't think I was tentative. I didn't think I was in some, yeah, I was a writer. I'd had 4 plays produced by the time I was 16. I I knew what I was, and I was not finding myself, and I didn't appreciate being manipulated and controlled by professors or anybody. My parents still had a claim. I couldn't support myself yet, but nobody else. And so what you do is you write independent characters who have their own thoughts, who have attitudes about everything, especially their own family. You don't make them, I mean, if you want to have somebody who is bratty to his parents, then you don't show him being bratty to his parents. You show his parents being idiotic to him, because that's the world he lives in, the one where he was spawned by idiots and has to live with them until he comes of age. Um, because kids don't decide usually to be bratty, or if they do, they have a darn good reason. They feel like it's been earned by somebody. And so you motivate your characters as you would motivate any character. Why are they doing what they're doing? What do they want to accomplish? What do they dread? What do they hope for? Who are their friends? Who are the people they trust? Who are the people they do not trust at all? And so you develop them like people. Here's a secret that most people don't know. You also do that with children. They're ignorant, and you can play off the ignorance. I remember when I was 5, I was in kindergarten, and this kid formed a club that he allowed me into. But then I offended him somehow, and he said, "You're fired from the club." I had never heard the term fired. My dad was a grad student at the time. I didn't know people could be fired. I didn't know what it was. So I said, "With real fire?" And he said, "Yes," because I don't think he really understood what it was either, but he knew that real fire intimidated me more. So I went home, I talked to my dad about it. He laughed. I just hate it when adults laugh at your misconceptions when you're a child. But he explained that being fired has a completely different meaning. It has nothing to do with flames. It has to do with firing a gun, that you shoot somebody out of their job like a bullet from a gun. And that's what being fired means. So that was, good for me to know. I was an ignorant child. At the same time, I was already me, and I knew a lot of stuff. I just didn't know that thing. And doesn't that describe you right now? You know a lot of stuff, and yet there's some things you just don't know yet. And the worst thing is, to go back to Dick Cheney here, uh, there are the things you don't know, the known unknowns. But the worst ones are the ones that you don't know. You think you've got it sussed on something, and you just don't know what you don't know. And that's going to bite you in the butt every time. That's how young writers give themselves away. I remember reading, 14-year-olds, 14 and 15-year-olds, and several of them tried to write adult married characters. It was laughable. They had lived in a family with married adults. It happened in both these cases, and yet they had no idea how adults think, how married people relate to each other. Nothing, nothing. And so they gave themselves away. It was clear that they were just kids. When I do sessions with younger writers, I say, when people say write what you know, that's not true. Know what you write. Make sure you know what you're talking about. But if you only write what you know, then 40-year-old people can't write about somebody who's 45. And that's just stupid. We can write about anybody, any age, any time, any period, history, future, whatever. But What you can't do is write about a stage of human life that you don't know yet. I'm finally getting to where I might be able to start writing some old people, because I was never old before, but now I'm there. Uh, when I started writing, I often wrote about children because, first of all, that's where life starts. So if you're developing a complete character, why do you skip over the developmental portion? But the other reason was I understood children. I had been one and I was done. And so I could write children. But the weird thing is, I was criticized because my writing of children was so bad, because I wrote children who didn't behave at all like what teachers of gifted children experienced with their kids. And I thought, no, no, you don't know who they are. You only know how they act around you. Because I remember very well hanging out with the smart kids from kindergarten on. And I know how we talked. I know what we thought about and how we felt about a lot of things. We were people already, ignorant people, but smart, ignorant people. And so we were constantly learning, constantly teaching each other. And I felt confident writing smart kids. Uh, Gradually, I began to be able to write smart later adolescents, smart adults. Then I started really working on writing people who were mentally not the smartest arrow in the quiver. And I found that I don't really know how to do that. I know lots of average people, but they all are able to carry on conversations with me and they seem to understand all the words. So how do I change them to show that they're not that bright? Everybody I know seems to be smart enough to me, or we wouldn't have been talking. So when you're trying to write adolescents, children, people of an age that you are not, put yourselves in their shoes as best you can. Imagine their lives as best you can. When I wrote a novel with an all black cast called Magic Street, I was doing it in response to a request by a friend of mine who had grown up as a middle class Black in Los Angeles. And he said, nobody writes Black protagonists. And I said, well, wait a minute, and I listed some Black characters. He said those were all sidekicks. Nobody ever does a superhero who is Black. Now, he knew about the ones that he knew comics backward and forward. He said those don't count because only white guys were writing them. And I said, well, you do know I am a white guy. And he said, yes, he did know that. And so I said, so how am I supposed to write Black people when I have never been and never will be Black? So he gave me a few helps, like what would a 30 to 40-year-old Black person in LA at that time be named? He gave me a list of about 20 names, but he said a 15 to 20-year-old would be named, and he gave me a completely different list of names. And then he said, and if they're, your age, baby boomer, then this list of names. That was amazing help, because I know how to name people inside Mormon culture, and I know how to name people inside sort of standard generic American culture. But I had no idea, other than stupid television racist cliches, what Black people were named, how people would choose names. There was not a Leroy among them. Just thought I'd mention that. Whereas in Mormon culture, there were lots of names of men that began with Law and Law, Lamar, Lobdell, etc. For men. Anyway, those were weird. I know my culture, but the result was that not just with those names, but with a few other things, he gave me a neighborhood to drive through, which gave me a lot of good ideas. It's Baldwin Hills in Los Angeles. It was built as a white upper class neighborhood or middle class neighborhood if you're on the flat, but it's all Black now. The changeover was made 40, 50 years ago. And so I drove there and I used the things he taught me. And then I wrote the novel assuming that Black people were as human as I was, and that they would have exactly the same kind of adult desires, fears, concerns that I would have, except that they also had to watch out for white police. Um, whether they really had done anything and needed to or not, he said, there is no Black person who does not know exactly where the policeman is at all times. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll buy that. Then I just had them almost never run into any policemen because I didn't know if I could get that right. So when I finished the novel, doing it the best I could, I sent it to my editor at the time, Betsy Mitchell, and I had no knowledge of the fact that her husband was, in fact, Black. So she handed the novel to him without a word of explanation. And he read it and he came back, and here was his comment. And I knew that I had won. I didn't know that Orson Scott Card was Black. That was his comment. And I thought, okay. I was able to write out of my own culture because I had help and I imagined, I thought things through. And, it's the think method didn't really work to create great music in the Music Man, but it does work to create good literature. If you want to imagine a bad marriage and the only marriage you knew was your parents and they had a great marriage, then you have to think, what would they fight about? And start writing quarrels they'd have. And is one of them snippy while the other one shuts up? What's their style of argument? And you just imagine, you think it through, and you try writing little scenes that'll never be in the story. Don't try to bend your story to fit in these little practice scenes you wrote. Don't do it, because they won't fit. So you'll just bend your writing to no avail. But write little scenes so that you know who they are, so that you practice writing them. And then get started inside these characters you don't know. Now, slang. Teenagers use slang. Here's the problem. By the time you hear about their slang, it's already over. And so, and just take that as a rule. You guys all think that in some way you're still hip. No, you never knew the slang of your own generation, because the hip people don't become writers. They go on drugs and die, but that's an entirely different thing. Those of you who are boomers like me, I lived through the 60s and the 70s, and everything they say about those decades has absolutely nothing to do with the life I lived. I never demonstrated. I never, for or against any war. I was a college student and a high school student before that. And that's all. Just a guy doing what guys do. And so I read these things that are what really are going on. And none of them were going on with me or my friends. We were completely unregistered in American literature. So it's okay to write about teenagers who aren't using up-to-the-minute slang, because in the 2 years it takes to get your book on the shelves, it won't be up to the minute anymore. If you want to do what Anthony Burgess, was it Anthony Burgess? Anyway, did with Clockwork Orange. Who wrote that? Clockwork Orange? Anthony something, I think. Anyway, he invented his own future streets of London slang. And it was brilliant. It was one of the best things. And if you study a little Russian, you go, oh, here's where he was getting his slang. When he had the word for great, terrific, be horror show, I just thought he made that up. No, the word in Russian is хорошо. Хорошо. And so if you want to say great, terrific, you say хорошо. And in England, that's horror show. In America, we say horror show, and so it's not the same, but it was just brilliant. And the slang was believable because it was ahead of our slang today. When he talked about his droogs, we had to figure out from context that meant the guys he hung out with, because droog has no meaning to us now. nor do I think it has any in Russian. I may be wrong on that. And so what I do to create a good slang is I go to another language. I don't name it. I mean, in that case, we would know that it was Russian and it would be okay. But I'll go to a language nobody knows. I've used Portuguese before, but I've used that enough now that I can't get away with it. But I'll have people say things that work in a different language and say them in English, which is the language you're translating your book into. At least that's the conceit, is that it's not written in English by the characters, but in fact, English is the language that you're using to translate it into for us. And you can get yourself a good slang for your teenagers. Just remember that children are using warmed over teenage slang from 10 years before. And so it's okay for children to have out of date slang just so that older kids can ridicule them. It's really fun to have a kindergartner today say rad and have some skateboarding 12-year-old go, oh my gosh, are you 40? And that's fine.
Okay, good. All right.
By the way, I just so everybody knows, John knows that when you're working with me, if you don't interrupt me, I never stop. And so I take drinks now and then when my mouth dries out, and you notice he's seizing those opportunities to move us along. So please, John, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So, and also I see Stephanie Talents here. She was a winner in volume 40. She wrote the story Life and Death and Love in the Bayou. So welcome, Stephanie. It's an awesome story. You can read it when you get your copy of Rise of the Future volume 40.
Jack Nash is here too.
Who?
Jack.
Oh, good. Hello, Jack. I hadn't seen his coming. I just saw Stephanie's comment here. So welcome, Jack. He was a grand prize winner. So he was just on United Public Radio this afternoon with Joe Montalvo, who's also here with us right now. And his podcast just went up today too with as a grand prize winner on the Rise of the Future podcast. So we're surrounded by celebrities. So this is great.
Yeah.
Okay,
everybody here is a writer. I'm not impressed. Just because they won a prize. I've won some prizes. They sit on my bathroom shelf. It's fine. I'm glad I won them. They made a difference in my life back in the 70s and 80s. And now they don't mean that much. It's what I'm writing now that matters. Anyway, my little comment on awards. Go ahead.
Thank you.
By the way, if you're going to win an award, the Writers of the Future Award is the kind you want to win, because it means publication in an anthology that people actually read. Volunteers read Writers of the Future. Okay, plug over.
Good. Okay, thank you. This is from Andrea Ferrari Christeller. How do you manage depth of character in short stories?
Well, you still have to tell the readers that they're dead. That's an important step. And you're not going to spend a lot of time moaning over the death because you're writing a short story. There's not much time for moaning and grieving and keening and whatever.
Okay, the question is depth, D-E-P-T-H.
Oh, I thought you said death. And I thought,
yeah, I realized that the way you're answering it. So yeah, depth.
So deptha, D-E-P-T-H.
Deptha, the deptha of characters.
Okay, there are no deep characters. They're all exactly one layer of letters deep. You can't do anything else. It's only what you say in your story. So here's the depth that your characters get. Complexity of motive. And if you can't do that in a short story, give up now, because that's easy. Contradictory motives. Motives that they're embarrassed about, motives that aren't their real motives, they're just what they think their motives are, but later we'll find out what their real motive is, but we've seen them act on their real motive all along. That's a deep character. You can't write depth. You can't say, John was a very deep fellow. He thought deep thoughts. In fact, he sometimes drowned in his thoughts and had to come up gasping for someone to give him artificial resuscitation, and there was never anyone there. Okay, yeah, you can do that. That's actually mildly amusing, but still, you can't write depth. You can only show a deep character doing things that arise out of an as yet untapped psyche, which all of us have. Because you think you know yourself, but you're wrong. You don't. Because every one of you has already had this experience. You think back on something you did years or even just weeks before, and you go, now I know why I did that. How did you not know why you did it at the time? Well, the reason is we lie to ourselves, we fool ourselves, we think that we have the motive that we're proud of, when in fact we have the motive that we're ashamed of, or vice versa. You do something and you go, no, I'm not a nice guy. I did that, but just to get him out of the way. No, it was a nice thing that you did. And yes, it got him out of the way. And yes, you were glad to have him go once you'd done the nice thing. But you're still a nice person because you could have gotten rid of him with a punch in the nose. And you chose to get rid of him by being nice to him. And that's the kind of thing people don't know about themselves. So they can be nicer than they think. They can be worse than they think. They can even play with apparently a raccoon on their lap, as Dave Kavanaugh was doing. It looked like a raccoon. Was that a cat? Okay, it's a cat, but I swear that's a raccoon tail. Don't let him outside because he's going to her outside because she's going to be mated with by raccoons, and that's just a problem. Anyway, where was I? I guess I was done with that, wasn't I, John?
I think so. Yes, we
Okay.
went to raccoons. That signified.
Yeah,
So
that meant that
here's
that meant that I was distractible.
Exactly. Rainy H. Hello, Mitt from Colorado. My question is twists. My timing seems off when I write them, so I move to what feels like a better place. Read more books and still can't get twists to work. Advice.
Okay, I hate twists. I've used them when the story required it, but first of all, twists don't work unless you have set them up, so that when they happen, the reader goes, "Oh man, yeah." Because if they go, "What?" and throw the book against the wall, that was a bad twist. Now, I've done one of those too, but it was because I was writing in collaboration with somebody who insisted that the hero in the first third had to die suddenly a third of the way in. And so I prepared for it by having two other characters who were viewpoint characters who I thought were almost as interesting as the main guy. And so readers went ahead and liked the book. They were angry with me. That's okay. We're not in the same room when they're reading it. But I made it work because there was somewhere to go. I left them someplace to stand, a character whose mind they were already familiar with. But that was a deathly horrible thing to do because it was sudden. We have this guy who works in an office in the Pentagon. We meet his secretary several times. And then he walks into his office. She pulls out a gun and shoots him right in the head. No preparation with her. We had not a sign that she was going to be a traitor. But it worked for the story. The story is called Empire. You will hate that moment, but you'll see that it's worth it. Now, regular twists, you don't want them. Why would you want them? What happens and why in the order that the viewpoint character experiences them. So if the viewpoint character is surprised, we'll get that surprise. So to him, it might feel like a twist, but it's just the story going on. If you're trying to manufacture twists, that's because some literature teacher or school teacher told you that what made O. Henry's writing great was his twists. Well, yes, it didn't make his writing great. It made his writing salable. If you don't have the twist at the end of Gift of the Magi, then, or is it Gifts of the Magi? I think it's Gift of the Magi. Then yeah, the story, it doesn't even exist. There is no story without that twist. But it's also what, 4 pages long? Are you going to write that short? I hope not, because you can't develop anything in that amount of time. Though I say that, and Susan Palawick once wrote a brilliant sonnet that was a complete, rich, deep short story. But that was Susan Palwick, not me. I can't do it. Anyway,
Good.
if you're
That's
aiming for, the thing is, if you're aiming for twists, you will deform your story. But if you're telling your story, twists enough will come.
good. All right, this is from Yusuf Jamal to everyone. He's from New Jersey. My dad always wondered, Mr. Card, how you came up with the technology seen in Ender's Game. He and I both think you accurately predicted a lot of the tech produced in the early 2000s, especially the iPad. As a side note, your books have helped me a lot throughout my life, and I'm very grateful for your writing. Thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for giving my books a chance to infiltrate your brain. I have no program, so don't worry. I was not planning to brainwash you somehow. All I have is a story. And if there's any meaning in it, you supply half of it. As for my predictions, I never regarded that as a goal for science fiction because technology catches up with you and passes you. You know, when you're reading Heinlein and you realize we've already lived through his entire future history and none of it happened. You have to really stretch your brain to just be patient with all the stuff he got wrong and all the stuff that could never have been right because that's not how society works. Sociologist, he was not. But all I did was extrapolate from things that existed. People give me credit for inventing the internet. No. I was already online with Delphi and CompuServe before I wrote the novel of Ender's Game. And those online things don't happen in the short story that I wrote in 77. So that first copyright date has nothing to do with the book. The book is 1984, I think, maybe 83, 84. And some form of online networks already existed. However, the iPad seems to me to be absolutely obvious. People keep giving Steve Jobs the credit for being a genius, just like they give Bill Gates the credit for being a genius. Nothing they did was new. Nothing. I already had a better MP3 player than the iPod when the iPod came out. I liked it better. It was the Rio Riot. It was cool. It was classy. It wasn't a little cigarette case of a box. And Steve Jobs was given credit for cool design for a cigarette box with no labels on it. That was just laughable to me because the press believed everything Steve Jobs told them about how cool he was. Bill Gates, we keep getting told he's a genius. And maybe when he writes little programs to play Minesweeper for him, along with another guy who works for his company, trying to compete with each other with their little Minesweeper programs. Maybe he's a genius at that. But his Microsoft DOS or IBM DOS, PC DOS as it began, is just CP/M. Just CP/M. I was already running CP/M or MPM on my Altos computer, and the commands were all the same. I didn't have to learn anything new to run PC DOS. And when Windows came up, Xerox Labs had already invented the graphical user interface using the mouse, using icons. Both Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, in developing both Windows and Apple's interface, were taking from Xerox Labs. That's all. Nothing new. And so I didn't do anything new either. I'm not saying they're dumb. I'm saying they did what I did. They extrapolated from things that already existed and put them in people's hands. And then now we've seen what happens to society when those things happen. Did you even guess that when DVDs came out, they would last only 20 years before they were completely supplanted by streaming videos? I had no idea. That would have been a stupid idea to me. But then again, 45 RPM records, which ruled in the 50s and up through the mid 60s, late 60s, they were brand new when they came out in the early 50s. And we all got the little things that made it so we could run it on on a regular 33 RPM record player. And I never knew that they would just vanish all of a sudden when albums really took over. You just never know with technology when it will begin and when it will end. And so I guessed right on a few things, but I didn't guess right on when they'd end because I invested a lot of money in DVDs that we now no longer need to watch because it's just easier to download it to stream it. Did that answer the question? I didn't get anything right. It wasn't really a question. It was saying some praise to me, and I had to say, I don't deserve it, but thanks.
Okay, great. You're welcome. So next question from Chase Williams. Ender's Game was a story that moves seamlessly through time. What do you have to say in climbing the ladder of abstraction, moving between detailed scenes and summaries of events?
That is the entire business of writing fiction, is moving between narration and scenes. When they say show, don't tell, what they're saying is write only scenes. And they're wrong, idiotically wrong, horribly wrong. Because then you get novels that are written like, and then he took a step with his right foot. And with his weight balanced now over his right foot, he realized his left foot was now free to swing forward and allow him to take a step with the left foot, putting him about 18 inches farther ahead than where he had been before. If you had to read that for the progress of the Fellowship of the Ring just to get to the mountain, you'd kill yourself. You would. I mean, it would be horrible. Show, don't tell is crap. Tell almost everything. Tell until it's all set up. Tell until we know the main movements. And then get to a moment where some characters we already know about come together in a scene that matters. Because you only want to show the scenes that matter. And so you can show little bits of scenes here and there, little jabs of conversation. That's fine. That's nothing. That's part of the narrative. But when you sit there going dialogue after dialogue, speech after speech, that's a scene. And you have action, detailed action in between or during that scene. That's a scene. That's showing. And if you do that too much, you exhaust the reader. Because that means that is a section that they know they must pay attention to. You want to know the dumb thing so many writers do, and I've seen it done by professionals with stories who had won awards. And a new story, they would build up to what you know was going to have to be a pivotal scene, a confrontation between two characters. And you turn the page, it's a new chapter, and that scene is over. It never happened. It did happen, and now you're getting flashbacks to what happened in that scene instead of ever seeing the scene. Do you know what that is? You can call it humility. You can call it rank cowardice. But when you have a scene that you have been setting up that must be experienced by the reader, don't chicken out. You can write it. It's easier than you think. It almost writes itself. If you set it up properly, you already know what's going to happen in it. And the reader doesn't have to have anything explained because they already know who everybody is and what's at stake. And so you just blow through that scene. And it can be wonderful. You can discover surprising things when you hear what your characters say. And some of them will say things you go, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Do I have to go back and fix anything? No, this doesn't contradict anything that went before. Okay, this is what it is. And you move on with the new information in it. You discover so many good things when you're writing a scene, but don't skip the scene that you have to write. Now, I will tell you, there's one case in The World According to Garp where that rule was violated. And it was violated so brilliantly that John Irving deserved an award for that chapter. The Garp family, he's a college professor now, and they have several kids, at least two boys, because they're in the car with him. He and his kids have the habit of going to the top of their long hill driveway, cutting off the engine, cutting off the lights, and coasting all the way to the front of their garage. That's what they do. And everybody in the family knows it. Now, so they're heading home, but we are with the wife, who is sitting in a car parked at the top end, the end of the driveway, right in front of the garage, where a student is giving her fellatio in the front seat. She's giving him fellatio in the front seat. It's hard to do that with a woman. And so we know that they're there. And then we see the dad pull into the driveway, cut off the lights, cut off the engine, and coast. And then we skip to the next chapter, which is in the hospital. And gradually, bit by bit, we learn that the student got a penisectomy, which is always a little rough on a guy. The wife was injured too, but not badly. The husband had his seatbelt on, and again, not bad. One of the boys, the one in the backseat, did not have his seatbelt on, and he was blinded by the gear shift, the floor shift, the stick shift, when his head came forward, and that caught him in the eye. And we know all kinds of things now. We are told everything that happened, except the name of the other son is never mentioned. And by halfway through the chapter, you go, he's dead. He's dead. And he was wearing the seatbelt in the front seat, but he was strangled on the shoulder strap. And his neck was broken. And so we find that out in the last paragraph of that chapter. I fell apart because by then, John Irving had prepared me by the absence of that boy and the absence of any mention of him. Everything else was believable and set up and everything, but when we found out that he was dead, we already knew it and hated it. And I don't think I was the only guy who ever cried reading that chapter. Now, can you bring that off? Well, I'm sure you could if he hadn't already done it, but it has famously been done. Famously. And so any English teacher who's worth his salt would tell you, don't write that. John Irving did it in The World According to Garp. Everybody and his mother read The World According to Garp back when I was in college. Now, those people are all grandparents now, but nevertheless, they all know that chapter because it's the most unforgettable moment in the entire book. You're going to have unforgettable moments. It's just they'll be yours, not somebody else's. And so, what question was I answering here? I was answering the question.
You're talking about the ladder of abstraction and.
Oh, okay. And that's right. Narrative is not abstract. The narration has people doing stuff. The narration is where you tell what happens and why. And never forget the why. You may not know all of the causes because nobody does, but you know what the main character thinks the causes are, and that's all you need to tell us until he finds out or she finds out that she's wrong. That what she thought was the motive or the cause or whatever was not the cause. And always remember that nothing has just one effect. Nothing. Everything has multiple effects. If you ever write about a scientific discovery or advance that is so astonishing and publicized that people riot in the streets, turn in your poetic license. It's revoked. Because science fiction writers did that all the time. And it was by the time I was 9, I knew that was stupid. Why do people riot in the streets? Because some group, a party or the government, has already driven trucks full of bricks to drop the bricks off on corners so that the rioters will have something to throw. That's how Indonesian riots happen. That's how riots happen all over the Muslim world where riots are common. That's what riots are.
That's how they happen here in America too.
Yep, it is. It
Yeah.
is. They're planned, they're plotted. So don't commit that error. People don't just riot. What they do is get really pissed off and write ugly comments online. Right?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
that's how we do it. Anyway, that's
Okay, good. That's a good answer for that. Thank you very much. Okay, so here now, next one from Chase Williams. What is your favorite book to recommend to young writers as a learning tool or an example of great writing? So I'm going to submit Ender's Game by this guy named Orson Scott Card. And I also really enjoyed this book called Battlefield Earth by L. Ron Hubbard. But now over to you, Scott, to answer the question.
I think those are both good answers. Battlefield Earth is a little thick for some people, but at the same time, thick means that a master writer is showing you how you write thick books, which is not a bad thing for a new writer to see. Now, the other books I'd recommend are the books that I required my freshman comp and lit students to read at Notre Dame when I was a grad student there. Here's the list. First, I Am the Cheese by Robert Cormier, not The Chocolate War. I don't even like that book. I Am the Cheese. It is so complex as a narrative that it's this whole school in shifting viewpoints to the advantage of the book. Nobody in the book knows everything, but the reader knows everything. And it's so beautifully done. And you can read it in a night. It's a 3 to 4 hour read because it's a YA novel. It's short and you can't put it down. He does all of this manipulation without you ever feeling manipulated. You're just reading. You just want to know what comes out next. Now, the next book I gave people was The Princess Bride. And this was before the movie. None of them knew what The Princess Bride was. They thought it was some silly fantasy, which it is by design. But again, you want narrative levels, you want narrative strategies, you want to see how it's done, how points of view shift. Good heavens, it's another textbook by this brilliant writer doing his one work of love. This is the book he wrote all his other books to be able to write. And he's gone now, and he wrote some other very good books, but he was addicted to the twist, and it hurt him. But in Princess Bride, there are twists, like having Wesley be dead, but then finding out he's only almost dead, or only mostly dead. And Miracle Max gives him something that allows him to talk, even though he has to flop around on a bed instead of actually fighting, etc., etc. There are twists. And there's the most horrible twist at the end, which is just a moment of Stephen King evil that somehow William Goldman got, which is right when they're making their getaway. He gives us the actual ending where everything falls apart and it's a failure. Everything fails. And I don't know about you, but when I read that, I just screamed, ah, because it was a horrible betrayal of everything that had gone before. But then he goes ahead and tries to redeem himself by giving us the good ending, which the narrator of the book supposedly made up. Anyway, it is so complex that by the time I was through with them reading I Am the Cheese and The Princess Bride, I handed them King Lear with no explanation, told them to read no footnotes, no commentary, no introductions, just read King Lear. And do you know what? The papers I got from them were amazing. Analysis of King Lear at levels I've never seen grad students do. The only two people who botched that assignment were the two English majors in the class, because they did not obey me about not reading any commentary or footnotes. It was obvious that they were giving the received version of King Lear, which I already knew, and it's tedious to read it again when a student writes it, but I didn't flunk them. I just gave them the A- they had earned for not following directions. They were shocked to not get A's, but good. It was good for them. On the paper. They got A's in the class because, I'm an easy grader. If I were grading you guys, here's what I would tell you. If you were my new class coming in, I would say, everybody here starts out with a default B. You have to work to get lower than a B. B is your grade. Now, if you want a better grade, all you have to do is write one of your 2 stories that gets a better grade. Whatever your highest grade is on a story you turn in is your grade for the course. And if you write an A story, you have an A in the course. And if you write a D- story, you get a B in the course. So there should be no tension. Nobody's going to lose their scholarship in this course, etc. I'm an easy grader. But you know what? That's what most professors are really doing anyway. Grade inflation is ridiculous. I just don't try to pretend I'm not doing it. And my students performed. They got better. They did great work. So I feel like it didn't make my class any worse. But that was not what I was going to be talking about. What was I going to be talking
Anyway, you answered the question good. You answered the question, your favorite books. We got several more questions here. So I'd like to
Okay,
move on
cool.
then. Good.
Cool.
So this is from JT Rayleigh. Do you use scene sequel or motivation reaction units or some combination of them for your scenes? What is the right balance?
Wow. Sounds to me like you've taken a screenwriting class. Um, all of those were completely nonsensical words. I'm so sorry that someone taught them to you and made you think they were real things. Just tell the story. Tell
Good.
what happens and why, period.
Good. Thank you. Chase Williams, question. What are the most common flaws you find in young writing? So you kind of like touched that already with your last answer. We got some more questions. I'd just like to move on here.
I answered you, Chase. You got it.
Yeah, exactly. Michael Strickland, question. What is your opinion on the value of getting an MFA degree in creative writing? In case it matters, the program I plan to attend is one of the few that is supportive of speculative fiction, genre fiction, Western Colorado University. Is that the one that Kevin Anderson teaches? Western Colorado University? I think maybe it's that one. But anyway, what's your question on, what's your opinion on MFA?
I need to know who's in the faculty. Is the science fiction person, the person who is open to that, a real science fiction writer? Somebody who's actually published? If it's Kevin Anderson, yeah. I think that sounds great. But what are you going to do with an MFA? Are you going to put that as a credential when you turn in a novel? Is your cover letter going to say, I have an MFA in creative writing from Western Colorado? Why? Why would they care? Because if you're 14 and you send in a professional manuscript, they don't care that you have not graduated from high school yet. That's going to mean nothing until the marketing guys get a hold of the fact that you were a kid, and then you have to beat them with a stick to keep them from saying so. Because you don't want to have people pick up your book going, oh, this is written by a child prodigy. No, you want them to pick it up thinking it's a real book. And so you'll keep those things to yourself. The MFA, if you want to teach creative writing at the university level, in other words, if you don't believe that you're going to be able to make enough money as a writer to support yourself and your family, and so you want to have the sinecure of a faculty position, remember this: if your writing has anything to do with science fiction and fantasy, almost no English department wants you. Even the ones that have writers who are very sympathetic. Fred Chappell loved science fiction, and he taught at UNC Chapel Hill, and was a wonderful writer. Tried his hand at science fiction now and then. Knew the field backward and forward. Treated me like an actual writer, which I appreciated. Though he did not treat me as an actual poet, and I think he was correct in that. But anyway, the MFA is only to have a terminal degree so you can teach on a faculty and be counted. When Southern Virginia University, where I taught until this fall, was getting its regional accreditation. By the way, national accreditation means nothing. The only thing that matters is regional accreditation. And so SVU already had national accreditation, but it was going after the regional, and they were being evaluated. And I was a horrible problem for them. I only had an MA, and I was bringing their average down because they needed PhDs. And so we were able to move me off the tenure track list, which I resented because I wanted ranking. I wanted to be a full professor there. I think that as a professional in the field, I had earned it. But that didn't come until after the accreditation was secured. They had to erase me from the consideration in the percentages of PhDs. As an MFA, you're counted as a PhD. That counts as a terminal degree from a university. But if you write science fiction, they have no idea what to do with you. At SVU, I taught a class every couple of years on the fiction of Tolkien and Lewis. I eventually learned that the only part really worth doing was the fiction of Lewis plus Screwtape Letters, but that's me. Because I'd never liked Perelandra, and Narnia doesn't need study, it's self-explanatory. But that's what they found to do with me, those two classes, creative writing. I also taught a class in hymn writing, which really is going to stand great for you on your resume. Because I could do what I wanted. They weren't paying me anything. So what were they going to tell me? If you try to teach that class, you're fired. My money would increase if I didn't have to have the commute to Southern Virginia University. Anyway, I would urge you to remember that most MFA teachers are people who wish they were making a living as writers, but couldn't. Sometimes you get one who can, Kevin Anderson, but rarely. Most of the time, you get people who are going to drop on you all the same crap that their literature, not writing, literature professors dropped on them when they were in college. And literature professors have no idea how fiction is written. None. Zero. Everything they say about published novels is completely irrelevant to the process of writing. So if you think you need a controlling metaphor, because they keep telling you about controlling metaphors in the fiction that you're reading in literature classes, you're dead. There's no controlling metaphor in fiction that you're writing. You find out what your metaphors are after it's published, and scholars tell you. Let the grad students read your stuff and tell you what your controlling metaphor is, and tell you what your 3-act structure is, and tell you all the other stuff that is complete bullshit when you're writing your own fiction. Because when you're writing your fiction, you know what you're doing. You tell what happens and why. That's all. If you get distracted into playing literary games, which has happened to me upon occasion, it will only lead you to a flushing toilet. And at best, you'll get a swirly. At worst, you will disappear without a trace. Just, I think that's a good metaphor. That's my controlling metaphor.
That's a good controlling metaphor to end off that one there with. Okay, good. Jennifer Tooker, question. I'm 60-something and just getting started in writing fiction. I have much experience writing nonfiction and academically. I love poetry and plotting and historical fiction, but I'm being very strongly called to write speculative fiction. What advice do you have for me to jump in and get my feet extremely wet? Smile.
Okay. It depends on how wet your feet already are. Margaret Atwood decided to write a science fiction novel. And because she already had a reputation as both the most obnoxious and the finest writer of literature in Canada, it was taken seriously, as if it were literature. But what it was really clumsy science fiction. And I said so in a review. I said it was a good story, but if she had just read some science fiction, then she would have known how to handle exposition instead of the clumsy way she handled it. She never forgave me. The one time we met, she was appallingly rude. It was so obvious that bookseller after bookseller, this was a Canadian conference of booksellers, came up to me and said, "Don't let it bother you how Margaret was treating you. She treats us all that way and we hate her." And so that was when I reached my conclusion that she was the most hated fiction writer in Canada. But if you're going to write science fiction, you have to have read it. Now, I don't know how much you've read. You said that your taste in reading was historicals. And of course, you were writing nonfiction. Historicals are wonderful, and they are semi-good preparation for writing science fiction or fantasy, because you have to create a world that the reader does not live in to create good historical fiction. So you have to take them step by step through the exposition of that world. The problem is you don't have a viewpoint character who is new to that world, unless you start with Pip, who knows nothing except for what happened at his brother-in-law's forge. So unless you're starting with a child and you're doing historical fiction, you have to drop us into the middle of an existing world and help us discover how it works from the inside. That's hard. With science fiction and fantasy, the reader knows that the world that they're entering does not exist, did not exist, probably will not exist. So in that sense, they expect to have a certain amount of exposition, usually delivered in the Heinleinian method. The old way, in the old days, the 1920s and 30s, a lot of writers, I don't think L. Ron Hubbard ever did this because he was a better writer than that, but a lot of writers had what they call the expository lump, where two scientists sit there and tell each other things they both already know. Well, as you know, Bob, when the Planck constant gets into play here, come on, they would never have that conversation because they both already know it. But that was constantly done. It was the equivalent of the comedy of manners, the French bedroom farce, where the maid and the footman have a conversation telling all about what's going on in the lives of the rich. Because, of course, the playgoers know that the lives of servants aren't interesting. They only know that the lives of the rich are interesting, until Remains of the Day came and showed us, no, lives of the rich are all the same. It's the servants who have a fascinating life, Gosford Park, etc. And so it's that kind of exposition. But Heinlein did nothing of the kind. He dropped facts in unexplained. The classic example is that early in one story, the conversation is over, one guy goes to leave, the door dilated and he stepped through. The door dilated? And we're not going to say, for one thing, a lot of people did not know what dilated meant because they hadn't been to eye doctors enough. And for another thing, doors don't dilate. How could they dilate? Now, in fact, it's a ridiculous concept because nothing about the dilation of a door is more efficient or effective at doorness than a standard hinged door, okay, or a pocket door. But you know, the dilated door, you can probably dive right through the center of it and never, get stopped. But it was telling us we were in the future. From that moment, you knew this was not the present day. And he would drop in things like that, and then gradually you'd get to some things that were explained. He'd have somebody get on the highway, which consisted of rolling roads, basically the slide walk at the airport, only one after another, after another, after another. And the farther to the left you go, the faster they're going. So you learn how to step from a slower to a faster rolling road. And that was one of Heinlein's favorite concepts. And so he would explain it because it was his and it was favorite. Nobody else could use the rolling roads because he'd already thought of it and done them to death. But he made it work, and you got the sense that you were definitely in another world. Only one story was about the rolling roads. Otherwise, it was just there. Think of the movie I, Robot, which is way better than the book because the book is just a collection of unrelated short stories with no main character going through them except for Susan. Come on, guys, oh, you can't tell me, you're all muted. Anyway, Susan Calvin. And as Harlan Ellison said, he was hired to write a screenplay for I, Robot 40 years ago. And he had to give it up, he said, because there are no characters in it. And that is an accurate statement. No characters. The only character in it had all the personality of Spock, whom we liked because Leonard Nimoy managed to give him more life than the character deserved. But I, Robot gives us information that is revealed step by step. Nobody makes a huge deal about it when this robot-hating character played by Will Smith peels open his arm and has a robotic arm. And no one explains it. Other people had referred to his injuries. We didn't know that it meant that his limbs had been replaced because they worked just like regular limbs. And so we got that exposition with nothing else after it to tell us about it because we were as prepared as we needed to be. And we saw how the highways worked. Nobody had to explain it when we saw what their semi-trucks were like and go driving through tunnel-like freeways. And when there was a car chase that was really just a trap set for him, we saw it. So we didn't need to have it explained. That's what Heinlein's exposition was all about. Everybody learned from Heinlein how to do exposition. Post-Heinlein exposition in science fiction is an art form where you just bleed in the new information bit by bit and only explain what has to be explained to a character, not to the reader. And never does anybody explain to somebody what they already know. So you want to be able to do Heinleinian exposition in a science fiction or speculative fiction story. And it's not easy. And do you know how you learn to do it? Probably not by reading Heinlein, because he's dated in a lot of ways. He was so politically incorrect, he would have been canceled into the grave if he had still been alive. And he wouldn't have shut his mouth ever over what he believed, because first, he was right, and second, you were stupid. So, it's not that he was arrogant, it's just that he knew what he believed. And so what you do is, here's your reading course in science fiction, not novels. Get the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, which is what the Science Fiction Writers of America voted on as the best stories from before the Nebula Awards were instituted. And then you get the Nebula Award Winners anthologies. They had one a year. And read as many stories as you can stand in those. They're not all the best. Not always does the best story win a Nebula. Always, with Writers of the Future, the best story wins. But with Nebula Awards, there's a lot of politics and a lot of crap that goes on, more so now than ever. But you read those, and you've just received an entire course in the history of science fiction, and that's what you need to do, because every period of science fiction is still current. You can write in every genre. The best science fiction novel in the last few years was The Martian by Andy Weir. That is a the Campbellian analog story from 1948, written now, so the F word is in it, which couldn't have happened in 1948. And needlessly, I just thought, why can't this guy just talk like me and my family? Anyway, if you read Andy Weir, if you read his The Martian, then you're getting current 1948 fiction, because there are people still writing 1948 fiction. Larry Niven is still writing mid-50s science fiction, as he always has, because in the 60s, when the new wave of science fiction came, Larry Niven didn't like it. So he kept writing the science fiction he liked. And there are those who say he single-handedly kept the science fiction genre alive during those years because the readers didn't want weird, arty stuff. The readers wanted Niven. They wanted more Blish. They wanted Ursula K. Le Guin, who, despite the fact that she is literary at heart, very rarely wrote anything that was literary to the point of excluding regular readers. So if you want novels to read instead of those anthologies, which may be hard to get, here's your reading course with novels. Ursula Le Guin, Rocannon's World. I know, not Left Hand of Darkness, not The Dispossessed, the early stuff. You want to read Larry Niven, and you want, is Ringworld the one he wrote with Jerry Pournelle?
Yes.
Okay, that one is good. That's good, even though it ends with a punchline. But I'm trying to think of what my go-to Niven would be. I used to have all of his works memorized. They were just on a list right there. But that's what happens when you get old. Your lists start disappearing. But Larry Niven, you have to know Harlan Ellison. All he wrote were short stories, so get a collection of his short stories. Ray Bradbury, and I recommend The Martian Chronicles, even though when he wrote that, we already knew enough about Mars to know that every single scientific idea in The Martian Chronicles is false. But he wrote it about the Mars that he grew up believing in. The Mars with canals. I'm going to leave out all kinds of writers. Then I should. You have to read Dune. You have to read Dune. The new miniseries, 2 movies that HBO did the first one of, and the second one is in theaters right now. I think that is the first time that has had a decent film made of it. And Timothée Chalamet is so much better than any of the earlier leads in the movie. In that movie, it is an outstanding movie in its own right. And so if you want to skip reading Dune, you can. But here's what my wife tells me: she had never read Dune, and she sat on the couch beside me watching the first installment of Dune. And we had to pause probably 25 times for me to explain what was going on. So the movie does not carry its own expository burden. Read the book. Read the book. And the audiobook is good. It's worth listening to. So if the book looks too intimidating, just put it in your ears and the time will fly by. I'm leaving out so many wonderful writers, but that's a good start. If you know those, you'll have an idea of what a science fiction novel needs to be. Now, if you're writing YA, Singularity by William Slater, one of my absolute favorite young adult novels. And yeah, that's it. That's my list of YA novels.
Good. Thank you.
So
Because we got,
I hope that helped at all, Jennifer.
Good. We're up to 55 new messages, so I'm going to try to motor through these things here. So, Mark,
I thought you said it was only 7 more.
Yeah, well, that was then. Now it's now. So, my prologue office is from Mark Green Low, and my prologue offers elements to the second book in the series. It hooks the reader in the present tense. Then the protagonist tells his story in sequence to present day. Is this an acceptable format?
Absolutely not. You have a prologue. Why? You use your point of view character. When your point of view character finds out stuff, then the reader will know it. Why are you giving us crap that isn't in that material? Why are you trying to hook us with something that isn't part of the story? If it says prologue or even hints at being a prologue, we know it doesn't count. I skip prologues now because if the book's any good, I can start where the story starts and I'll find out everything from the prologue that I need to know. Take George Martin's Song of Ice and Fire. Game of Dragons, the first book. There's a double prologue. And guess what? You find out everything you need to know from that prologue in the process of the first 4 volumes. The weirdest stuff you don't even find out or need to know until volume 4. So why? Prologues prolong the beginning. I have committed the crime of prologues. I wrote a 2-page prologue that really hurt the sales of my book on the novel Lost Boys. And I wrote 2 chapters of prologue to my novel Heart's Hope, which I think is my very best writing. But the prologues don't begin the real story. And so even though they contain information, the information you get from them is information that was already in the book later when things came up. Trust your storytelling. Use your structure. Begin by promising the book you're going to deliver. If you're going to deliver a book that consists of all prologue, by all means, start with that so that the reader knows not to buy it. But if you're going to write a story that has a beginning that promises that we're going to care about people, prologues are the enemy of caring. They're the enemy. And don't do that. And so it sounds to me like you have a completely wrong idea about how to tell a story. Now, does that mean that I'm right that you don't have an idea of how to tell a story? Not at all. The word prologue just sets off this explosion in my head. It's worse than brain freeze, okay? And so I have to give my diatribe about prologues. You just got it.
Thank you. All right. So he'll be able to get the rest of this whole 2 hours to be able to take deposits of what word it with is. Adriana Beach. How does someone stick the landing, so to speak, to produce an ending to a story that fits, upholds the themes, still satisfied, but is not a cliche? Any tips greatly appreciated.
Okay. I don't know why you would avoid cliches. You think you're going to come up with a plot that's never, ever been used before? You think you're going to come up with a book so original that people are going, whoa, he did this, he did that. No, you're not going to do that at all. Your stories are going to be 90% familiar to everyone who reads them. If they aren't, they won't know how to read them. You need to tread on familiar territory to let your reader find the new stuff as cool surprises along the way. If I want to teach you a foreign language, I'm not going to make it up. I'm going to use one that I already speak. And if you want to speak to me in a foreign language, you can use Spanish if you're speaking it very slowly and without slang and without Spanglish, or you can use Portuguese in a more relaxed way, but not if you have a Carioca accent, because I cannot hear the Carioca accent. So you can teach a language to people who speak the language or speak a language like the language, but you can't do anything original. Don't try to be original. Don't try to avoid cliche. Now, to stick the landing, meaning stick the ending. If you promise the ending properly at the beginning, we'll know when we get there because the promise is fulfilled. Fulfilled, just like that. You said the evil word theme. I have themes in my essays. When I write a work of criticism or theory, I have a theme or themes, theme per chapter, themes in each chapter. That's what you do with expository prose. You don't have a theme in fiction. Your theme is, and this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. That's your theme. And when you get to the ending that you promised, you go, and that's all I'm going to tell you. That's it, the end. That's your theme. And so I have lots of students who are trying to get me to do their homework for them, write to me asking, what is the theme of Ender's Game? And I say, if you start on page 1 and you read to the end of the book, and then you decide what you think the theme is, you're not wrong, because that's the theme you found in it. But I have no theme. I never had a theme. I still don't have a theme. I would be humiliated if I had a theme. If I catch myself having a theme, I get rid of it or I ridicule it within the book and then move on without it, because I don't want to have some expository theme. I don't want to have some controlling idea. You know what controls it? My unconscious mind and my feeling, ooh, this is cool. Let's have this happen. That's what controls it. That's my theme, is I thought that would be a really neat thing to do. I don't know if that helps you at all. I think it doesn't. I think it's the opposite, but I think you're on the wrong track. Because if you're themes, in order to find an ending, you're in the wrong business. You need to be a newspaper columnist. If you know how to begin a story so that you're promising, this is going to be a story about the War of the Ring, then you end with the end of the ring, right? And when the ring goes into the cracks of doom, we know it's over, right? Right, if we're Peter Jackson and kind of dim, because that's not what it is. What do we begin Lord of the Rings with? Bilbo leaving and Frodo inheriting. Frodo inheriting. The ring means he inherits the war, and it means he inherits the Shire. And he and his three companions go through all these adventures. Frodo and Sam fight the fight. They win the war. What do Merry and Pippin do? They drink a little bit of Ent drink, get a little taller than normal, and they observe stuff. Pippin is able to save the life of, or is it Merry? Pippin is able to save the life of Faramir from his father burning him. Merry is able to stab the ring wraith in the back of his knee, which is where hobbits can stab people. That's it. That's their contribution. And we get through a lot of material in order to get them in those places. But then we come to the scouring of the Shire. And the Shire has been mutilated. And men, evil men, Sharky's men, Saruman's men have come in to spoil it like Saruman's lands were spoiled. And that's when Merry and Pippin rouse the Shire and win the war and save their world. And if you don't have that in Lord of the Rings, you have no idea what that story was about. And Peter Jackson had no idea what the story was about. He complained, the ring goes into the cracks of doom, and then it has about 5 endings after that. No, it goes into the cracks of doom. We want to see that Frodo and Sam get rescued. We want to see them get the adulation they deserve. They get that. It's a wonderful thing. It's part of the romantic structure of story. But we still haven't seen why Merry and Pippin exist. And we need to. And so if we get the scouring of the Shire and Sam can open his box of soil and take the last few grains after he's placed it lovingly in at every new tree, and then he blows it to the wind so that this magical soil will go everywhere through the Shire. I don't know about you. I cried at that. That was so important to me because that was Sam's fruition. He wasn't the official ring bearer. He was the hero. He's the one who delivered Frodo to the cracks of doom, and he never wavered. Whereas Frodo wavered at the end, couldn't do it. Sam's the hero. And when you take away his box of soil and that seed of the Malorn tree, you've cut the heart out of Lord of the Rings. You've cut the heart out of Tolkien. And then it would be different if he hadn't added anything, but Peter Jackson added stupid stuff from the face of the hero, as if he thought Tolkien didn't know all that stuff. He wanted a Fisher King motif. He would have put it in. He didn't, and it isn't there. And so Arwen is suffering with the land. Oh, why would that happen? And what happened that made her stop suffering? Nothing. Nothing changed. And suddenly she's okay again. It was a stupid, stupid bit of bad writing, which exists in Lord of the Rings. Great movie, brilliantly filmed, wonderfully well acted, and well directed, except for the part about where he was also the writer. Anyway, that was all about the original question, and I haven't answered it, is ending, sticking the ending. You have to promise it. And then when you get to it, it has to mean all that you want it to mean. That is, if you want to pile meanings on it, pile them on before, so that not only does this ending save the world, but it also saves the kidnap victim, and it also saves, et cetera, so that we have it set up so that the ending ends everything. Now, my favorite example of an epilogue is in Pride and Prejudice, because it doesn't need an epilogue. Everybody who's supposed to get married is together. And so we know it's a comedy, it ends with marriages. That's what happens. But it's so wonderful to have her do her little sarcastic take on every major character in Pride and Prejudice, only a paragraph each. And it is so funny and true to those characters. Unlike Bernard Shaw's epilogue to Pygmalion, which is My Fair Lady, in which he undercuts everything that he wrote, created in Pygmalion, because he was embarrassed that it seemed to be a love story. He didn't write love stories. He wrote St. Joan, for heaven's sake. He wrote Mrs. Warren's Profession. He was not guilty of a love story. So he had to undercut that love story. But that was Shaw. He believed that Shakespeare only wished he were as good as Shaw was going to be. And as soon as you start thinking you're better than Shakespeare, you're a normal writer. Oh, so pardon me. I'm going to say that is not an answer to any question. I'm going to say this. Every one of you has self-doubts. Every one of you. If you don't have self-doubts, then you need to start doubting yourself. No, the self-doubts are what allow you to learn. You don't think that everything you wrote is engraved in stone. You know that it can be changed. It can be done over. That gives you the freedom to write, not to rewrite, but to write a new first draft from the beginning when you need to. And I've done that more than once. Had a book that was nearly done, set it aside, and without looking at that manuscript, wrote a whole new one, in which different things happened, and I made better choices. You have to not be afraid of that, and having self-doubt is how you do that. But while there's one part of you that absolutely believes that no one has ever written worse crap than what you just turned out, there's another side of you going, by that, Mr. Bill Shakespeare, you couldn't have done that, because you are terrific. Nobody else knows how to tell your stories, only you. And so you have to have that confidence too in order to just start typing, and let alone let the manuscript go out the door or over the waves of the internet. So you have to simultaneously suspect that you're awful and suspect that you're a genius. And you're right about both of them, given enough time. Okay, do we have something else, John?
We do. This is from Vidya Srinivasan. I totally butchered that, but anyway, that's what you're getting. Protagonist is 17 on an alien world. She's considered an adult in her world. Would my story be considered YA?
Say it again.
So my protagonist is 17 on an alien world. She's considered an adult in her world. Would my story be considered YA?
I have seen novels. I mean, I have written novels that begin over and over, novels after novel after novel, that begins with a young protagonist, none of which were counted as YA. Then when I did set out to write a YA novel, my Pathfinder series, I wrote it exactly the way I wrote my non-YA novels. No differences, no changes. And they counted as YA because the heroes were young, not as young as the characters in my other books, but young enough. And so who decides whether it's YA? The editor. I have had two friends write novels that began with young protagonists, but they moved through to become adults by the end. And it's definitely full-fledged grown-up fantasy at grown-up lengths. And they would send it to editors, and the editors would say, this is YA. And I would be baffled. I had read it. I didn't think it was YA. But you know one thing? What it is that the editor probably knew that it was good, but didn't want to publish it herself. It's usually her. Didn't want to be the editor. So they wanted to pass it off to the YA editor. It was about the internal politics of the publishing company. It was not at all about what you wrote. Because if you call it a YA novel, they'll look at it that way, but then they'll tell you, this isn't a YA novel. We can't publish this YA. It's not a junior high library in America that would buy this book. So, okay, apparently not YA. What makes it YA? One thing is you try to avoid things that will make parents mad. So try to keep the language cleaner than your average R-rated movie. Even cleaner than your average PG-13 movie, which about 10 years ago, they allowed one F word and you could keep your PG-13. And I'm going, why is there a PG-13 if it still has the most offensive word in the R-rated? Anyway, it's stupid. But think of it as being PG or PG-13. G-rated is for picture books, for early grades, pre-readers, early readers. You're not doing that. So if you have a 17-year-old protagonist, how long is she going to stay 17? My guess is no more than 1 year in book time. Now, if the story all takes place in 2 weeks and she's 17 the whole time, then fine. She's 17 and she's a teenager, and the rule in YA, in children's literature, is your protagonist needs to be 2 years older than your intended audience. So for an audience of 15-year-olds, a 17-year-old protagonist is right. So you're talking about early high school, and nothing wrong with 17 for an advanced YA book. But there's also nothing wrong with 17 for an adult science fiction novel. So you write it as you think it should be written, no matter age group. Don't think about the age group. Just like as a children's book, don't think about childish vocabulary. Your editor will help you fix up the vocabulary if it's not appropriate for a fourth grade reader, and that's what you're aiming at. Don't sweat that. It's like a screenwriter who wrote The Fisher King. He was going to do a draft of Ender's Game for a while, and I talked about how hard I had to work to keep it under 120 pages. And he said, you don't do that. You just write the screenplay, however many pages it is. After you've got a great screenplay, then you start cutting for time, period. You don't do it before. If you try to cut in your head before you write, you'll leave out all the best stuff. You won't feel free to invent what you need to invent. And that's kind of how I feel about writing YA or children's. Just write your book, write your story. And then if you want to fit it into a genre and it doesn't quite fit, and there are things you can cut that will make it fit, then cut them. Right?
Good.
Mhm.
Good. That works. All right. So we're down to about the last 10 minutes here. So here's from, and then Chase Williams, just so you know, I know you've got a lot of questions, but I want to give other people's questions a chance to be addressed here. Eunice from Montreal, I would like to ask questions about tagging in dialogues. What are your thoughts about using colons to separate one character from another dialogue similar to screenwriting? Is this an applicable method for writing novels? I'd like to ask, go
I
ahead.
can answer it. It's a terrible method for screenwriting. I've never seen a real screenwriter separate two different speeches by two different characters using only a colon. That's just each speech, each character begins on their own line in screenwriting, period. And that's not going to change. It'll just look like you're trying to cheat and get more words in without breaking the 100. When it comes to dialogue in books, here's what it is. Every time you change, it's a new paragraph. Every time. Even if one person says only one word, that word gets a paragraph to itself if somebody else answers. You can put the he said, she said anywhere in the line, but the tag is that. That's the tag. So, no, he said, that's not going to work for me at all. No, that's not going to work for me at all, he said. He said, no, that's not going to work for me at all. Those are all perfectly legitimate. No, that's not, he said, going to work for me at all. Yeah, you can do that too. It gives it a little beat, a little break. It's annoying if you do it too much, but if you do it at all, it's fine. So why do you tag? You tag so that the reader never gets confused about who's talking. Guess what? You get confused about who's talking. If there's anybody here who has never had a page of dialogue where you lost track and you had one character answer himself, then congratulations to you. I just did it 2 days ago in the book I'm writing now. I didn't know I was doing it. I was keeping track. I remembered writing that page, and I remembered writing those lines, and I remembered that I had a character answering himself without realizing it. So you do it so that they can keep track. Now remember, you are always writing an audiobook, always, because reading, the letters are processed through the audio center of the brain. You read it as if you were hearing it. And you know that's true because when you're reading along and all of a sudden you come to a name or a word that you can't pronounce, you can't go on. You can't even go on saying weird X word. You have to figure out how to pronounce it because your ears have to be able to receive the story. So the reader, your reader, is performing the audiobook in her own mind. And you want to provide exactly the tags she needs to keep track of which voice is speaking which dialogue and how it's being said. You don't often have to put that in, but sometimes you do. Now, normally, and by normally I mean 99.9% of the time, the word you will use is said. Do you know why? Because said is a comma. It's just a mark of punctuation. Nobody reads any meaning into it. Oh, he said that? Oh, it's nothing. It disappears. And so if you write something other than said, that stands out. That trips the reader up. Asked is okay. Answered is okay. He answered. Yes, that's okay. Weird pronouns are all the vogue right now. If you think that's going to last and become a permanent part of any language, by all means, write politically correctly. Otherwise, use English. Because my feeling is this idiotic fad is going to pass, and we're going to call people he and she, because we are the least gendered major language in the West. All the Romance languages are far more gendered than us. All the Indo-European languages are far more gendered. Where is our gendering in English? He and she. His, her. Him, oh, her again. That's it. That's the gendering of English. And we had some nouns that were gendered, stewardess, but we don't use those anymore. We can live without, we're fine. But the he said, she said thing is what disappears. You get the information of who's speaking and nothing else. Now, if you need to say, he finally pulled his finger out of his nose, examined it carefully, and then ate what was on the end. If that's important for you to say, then you put that in the same line with his dialogue. So any action that is performed by a character needs to be in the same paragraph with any dialogue spoken by that character at that time. You don't start a new paragraph for the same character's actions. But if a character says something and then another person scratches his head, and when the other person scratches his head, that is a new paragraph, just as if it were dialogue. So, and those are the rules because that's what readers have been trained to expect. Even if you weren't conscious of those rules, you used them to navigate. You use them to get through the scene. So keep using them yourself now and be a good guide to your readers so that the audiobook they perform is accurate.
Good. All right. So we've come up now to, we got a couple minutes left. What I'd like to do is take one more question. We've got so many more messages, but one thing, since this is, you're also a Rise of the Future judge, why should somebody enter the Rise of the Future competition?
I don't think of it as entering the competition. I think of it as when you finish a story that you are proud of, where do you submit it first for publication? Writers of the Future is the only answer that makes sense if it is speculative fiction, because they answer 4 times faster than any of the magazines used to. You get a much bigger audience than any of the magazines ever had. It is a launch for a career. If you put on the cover letter for your novel or for your query package, I am so-and-so, I have written a such and such novel called this. I won the 3rd quarter Writers of the Future contest. Would you like to see the completed manuscript? The answer you will receive is yes. I have never known an exception. If you are a quarterly or, of course, annual contest winner, they're not going to tell you to go to someone else. Winning the contest means more than being published in any of the magazines. So, yes, it's important to enter the contest, but not to enter the contest, not thinking, what if I win? What if I win? Well, that's good. Go ahead, let yourself dream. But what you're really saying is, I've already won because I've written this terrific story. But now, let's see if it can launch my career by appearing in Writers of the Future. That's what you're looking for, is a career launch. And I'll tell you, the folks at Writers of the Future, folks at Galaxy, they do everything they can to try to present you to the public and get you noticed and remembered. But the main thing they do is they publish a really fine anthology. Even though I'm going to try to have a story in it myself this year, I don't have to run the gauntlet of the contest because I'm old and they're patient. We'll see if I can write something they like. Anyway, that's why you need to submit to the contest.
Thank you very much for that. So with that, I also want everybody to, again, to get your copy of Rise of the Future Volume 40. We would, on riseofthefuture.com, you can find, navigate in the left side to be able to enter your short stories, or if you're an artist, you submit your illustrations as well. I'm going to invite you now to unmute yourself so you can all make your whatever comments and thanks to Mr. Card.
Oh, please be kind. Please be kind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well done.
Very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you all, and to all the good
you.
Thanks.
Very, very informative. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Come on, arigato.
All these
Appreciate your honesty.
You're a funny guy.
Excellent advice and
Thank you.
inspiration. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for attending, and I'll schedule another one in another 3 months.
Great, great.
All right. Have a great rest of the weekend, and until next time, and enjoy the book. Stephanie's right there. I see your picture.
So
Thank you,
good.
Mr. Goodman.
Congratulations,
Bye,
Stephanie.
everybody.
Did Mr. Carr, did he have a sore throat? I came in late. Did he explain his throat sounded a bit strange? Is he okay?
Yeah, he's fine. It was just at the end of the 2 hours. He
Oh,
was-
okay.
yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, I had 30 seconds and he had 1
Yeah.
hour, 59 minutes and 30 seconds.
Right. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, take care.
Thank
Thanks a
you all
lot.
for joining.
Thank
you.
Okay, and this will be
Right on. Take
posted.
care, everyone.
This will be posted on
Okay,
YouTube, on social
great.
media.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The recording has stopped.
Well, guys and girls, that was Orson Scott Carr answering questions for Writers of the Future. He does it every 3 months. We were just carrying it live tonight on the network. And so I wanted to let everybody know we're getting ready to wrap up now, but I hope y'all enjoyed it. Whoa, what was that scary thing? I know, man. They just let any scary guy up in this stuff.